Avagis and Professor Al-Azhar Law College, Thodupuzha. A warm welcome to you all to the 6th day and 11th section of the International Faculty Development Program titled Legal Research and Pedagogy in Changing Era. I know you all are waiting for the 11th section that is to be held by Dr. Sindhu Thulaseedharan, Associate Professor and Head, Department of Law, University of Kerala, Karivattam, on topic parameters for effective assessment and evaluation of students' learning. She is having PhD in personal laws and property rights women with special reference to Hindu law and also having teaching experience for graduate and postgraduate students for more than 19 years. And 6 persons were awarded PhD under her guidance. She also contributed articles in journals, knowledge-based volumes, chapters for books, and seminar proceedings, and also acted as a coordinator for several short-term and refreshment courses at the University of Kerala, and act as a resource person invited to talks in several programs. Besides these, she is a chairperson and member of the board of studies at University of Kerala and also in Chennai. And now she is also acting as an external expert on the research advisory committee constituted by Mahatma Gandhi University. And I'm very happy and proud to welcome such an eminent and lovable speaker, Dr. Sindhu Thulaseedharan, to this International Faculty Development Program titled Legal Research and Pedagogy in Changing Era. Welcome, ma'am, to this floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Shiva, for your nice words.
Thank you, ma'am. Once again, I'm welcoming all faculty members, research scholars, professionals, academicians, and other participants to this International Faculty Development Program organized by Al-Azhar Law College. I wish you all the best to the participants and looking forward to a productive day. Thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Shiva.
Yeah.
So let us start the session. I know that it is, am I audible?
Yeah, ma'am, you are audible.
Yes, yes, okay. So I know it's an afternoon session to speak about learning, pedagogy, and research methods is quite an, what do you say, boring thing, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible and lucid as possible. So let us start with the learning, the parameters for effective assessment and evaluation of students' learning. So in my view, when we have to adopt methods of teaching, we can do it on our own. We can select the parameters on our own. What we wish we can do. So that depends upon the context, what we are doing. If you're teaching, say, for example, if we are doing an analytical thing or a descriptive thing, we can choose the mode accordingly. But if you're going for an empirical thing, we'll have to choose the mode in a different way. So that depends upon the content or the context, what context we are dealing with. Then there comes the assessment criteria, how we can assess if you are going into an empirical thing. If suppose our students are dealing with an empirical aspect, then we'll have to go for certain other assessment criteria. So which are the parameters that should be adopted in assessing and evaluating students' learning? So let us see one by one. I have prepared a PowerPoint for that. So before going into the parameters, we'll have to know about what is learning. So learning means, or learning has many outcomes. Learning is a process. It starts with teaching, but it ends with certain outcomes that should be there towards the end. So the outcomes are more important than teaching. Whether that has served the purpose is an important thing. So let us start with the first slide. So before that, we'll have to go into the aspects of learning. There are different domains of learning. You know that a very famous educational psychologist, Benjamin Bloom, has identified 3 domains of learning. One is knowledge, that is cognitive domain, which is related with knowledge. The other one is the affective domain, that is related with attitude. And the third one is psychomotor domain, that is affected with, that is dealing with, or that is related with physical skills or manual skills. So what we should have to adopt, or which are the ways we will have to adopt for assessing or evaluating the students? What do you mean by assessment and what do you mean by evaluation? Assessment should always come from the student. That is what the newer concept calls for. And evaluation should come from the teacher. So evaluation is a an aspect, or it is a matter that should come from the part of the teacher, while assessment is a process, or it is a parameter that should be assessed by the students, or instructions should come from the students in regard to assessment, whereas instructions should come from the teacher in regard to evaluation. So before starting with assessment, we'll go to the parameters of learning first. What does student learning imply? So what is learning? Learning is actually the act of acquiring new or modifying and reinforcing a thing that is adding to the existing knowledge, behaviors, skills, values, or preferences. And it may involve synthesizing different types of information. So what is there already, we'll add to that. So it is the act of acquiring new things. It is the act of acquiring, modifying what is there already and reinforcing what is with us. Then that totally adds to the existing knowledge, to our behavior, skills. As I said earlier, as Benjamin Bloom has identified, there are 3 different aspects, that is knowledge, attitude, and skills. So now learning is an act that is required, or that should be acquired for the sake of adding to the existing thing, or for the sake of acquiring new knowledge, new skills, new attitudes or behaviors. So that is called learning. So we know that human learning may occur as part of education. So it also deals with it is also extended to the personal development of the individual, and also it is a part of training. It should be meted out to the learners as a part of training. So it is goal oriented. What is the goal that should be achieved? You know that nowadays we have outcome based education. So in a program, in regard to each and every course, we'll have to set out the outcomes. So towards the end, we'll have to see whether the student has achieved those goals. So if there is a gap between these, that is between the teaching, between the act of teaching and the point at which the goal has to be achieved, if there comes to happen hiatus, or you can say a gap in between these two, we'll have to bridge it. So we'll have to fill the gap. And for that, we should use assessment and evaluation. And the second one, we can think about curriculum. What is curriculum? So curriculum comes out of the word curare, Latin word, which means to run. That is for running for running education, it implies that a curriculum is needed. So curriculum usually define learning that is expected to take place during a course or a program in terms of knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So they should specify the main teaching, learning, and assessment methods. All this will come within the purview of curriculum. So it is a holistic way of achieving what is intended out of a learning process. So that is what is curriculum. You can say it is the process of planning, implementing, and also evaluating the curriculum that ultimately results in a curriculum plan. So what is required is curriculum development, out of a curriculum plan. So you know that as we have earlier, I have mentioned taxonomy means classification. So according to Benjamin Bloom, the taxonomy can be classified, taxonomy of learning can be classified into cognitive, that is mental skills, affective, that is regarding attitude, and psychomotor regarding manual and physical skills. And you know that these are not mutually exclusive, all these are dependent on each other. That is, for instance, if you want to play a game, say chess, the person will have to learn the rules of the game. That is cognitive domain. He will have to have the mental skills for learning the rules of the game. That is for updating his knowledge about the rules of the game. That is cognitive domain, that's knowledge based. And at the same time, he will have to learn. He also, the person has to learn how to set up the chess pieces on the board, how to move the chess pieces. So these are all part of the physical skill of the person, that is psychomotor, which Bloom has classified. And later, when he starts playing game, he will continue his activity, that is for a number of times, that is through through involving in playing game, he will develop a tendency to love the game itself. That is, the game become a part of his life. And that is affective domain, that will be adding to your attitude. So that will be causing in you the feeling of love, emotional attachment for the game. So all these are part of affective domain. So we can classify it as knowledge, then the second one is attitude, and third one is skill. So that is what is happening in the case of each and every instance of learning, not only in game, but also in academics. Then Bloom, a psychologist, who is educational psychologist dedicated to developing ways of describing, as accessing and encouraging higher order thinking in children and adults. For that is made his classifications. And regarding knowledge domain, cognitive domain, we will know that it has a number of steps which Bloom himself has classified, and that has been reworked by many people thereafter. So that is known as cognitive domain. So we know that first of all, from the lowest level, starting with the lowest level, we will have to acquire knowledge first. Whatever we hear or whatever we learn, out of that we'll have to acquire knowledge. That is adding to our skills, to our mental skills, knowledge, comprehension. We'll have to understand what we are learning. Then we'll have to apply it in a particular, we'll have to learn to apply it with respect to a particular situation. We'll have to analyze what we have done. Then the final step is synthesis and then evaluation. Last, the teacher or the instructor can analyze what the student has learned out of the whole process. So till synthesis, we can say that till application, the student has a role, and thereafter the teacher is there to analyze it, to synthesize what the student has done, and to evaluate this, the long process of learning that he has undergone. Then the second one is knowledge. If you were to further explain it, knowledge can be called as any data or information with regard to which we can arrange, define, duplicate, label, test, memorize, name, order, state, selects. All this can be done as first part of or the lowest level of cognitive domain, that is knowledge. So you can have a part of, you will have to achieve a skill to memorize what we have learned. Comprehension means whatever we have learned, we'll have to understand. And application means to use the information. What we have learned, we can use it. So that we can call it as application. Then we can call it as demonstration. Then dramatize, operate, practice, illustrate, solve, etc. All these come under application domain. Then he has what you can say, in the next step of cognitive domain, we can come to analysis. Analysis is using the information for the sake of analyzing something. Then synthesis, we can create new ideas out of that. Suppose if you have learned a rule of law, we can use it for the sake of developing new ideas. For example, if you have learned right to life, we can evolve a number of rights out of that single right to life. We have evolved a lot many. Supreme Court has evolved a lot many. That is synthesis. So we can add to what we have learned, and we can create our own ideas. That is synthesis. Evaluation is to make judgments about our knowledge. What we have learned, we can make a judgment, which we can call as self-regulated learning, because a person can make self-assessment of one's own. A person can make a self-assessment of those who are equally placed. That is called peer assessment. He can make peer assessment. He can have co-regulated learning. Then he can have self-regulated learning. All these are part of evaluation. So that is good if assessment is done by students, from the part of students also. So we'll have to associate students as well in assessment. Nowadays, we used to have many activities inside the classroom where students are also equally involved as teachers. So it's not only teachers, students have an equal involvement in the activities. For example, debates, when we conduct debates, when we conduct group discussions, when we conduct small groups discussions, we divide the whole team into different, small sub-teams. And we can ask each group to take up a sub-theme and discuss and find out their own ideas, or to evolve their own ideas out of that. So that is synthesis. That is to create our own ideas, to develop our own ideas out of a whole. We'll be taking up a matter as a whole, but we can divide that matter into sub-pieces, and we can entrust each group with a piece. And the group can handle it, and they can synthesize their own ideas out of that sub-theme. So that is what is co-regulated learning. All are there to regulate learning. It's not only the teacher, but students as well as teachers are equally there to regulate learning. So that is what is called peer assessment or co-regulated learning. There, the feedback should come from the part of the students. Students engaged with engagements with feedback. That is, student can engage with feedback also. But at the same time, he can rely upon the feedback that is given by the teacher for making further changes in his assumptions. So that is called self-regulated or co-regulated or peer assessments that a student himself or herself can make, apart from what the teacher does. Then the next slide is, this has been revised to a certain extent, and knowledge is there, but at the same time, instead of knowledge, Anderson has supplemented or replaced it with the word remember. Instead of knowledge, we can call it as recall or remember. So the word remember was supplemented instead of knowledge. And for comprehension, the word understand was used. And for the other words, their verbs were used. That is applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating. Above evaluation, one more thing was added, that is creation. That is, students should go for an invention or a, create something of a new of his own. So that is creation. It's more than evaluation. And we know that we have only gone one step further. Knowledge, that is the lowest level. But in US, in other countries, other developed countries, they have gone beyond evaluation. That is, they have embarked upon creations or discoveries. So we'll have to achieve that level. The aim of education is to bring students up to the level of creativity. The student should create of his own, out of what he has achieved, or out of the knowledge he has achieved, which is the base of learning. From there, he'll have to climb up the different levels, and he'll have to reach up to creativity. So that is, he will have to cross evaluation, and then he'll have to contribute his ideas or his creations to the society. So that is meant by create. That is to create after evaluation. So we have used a number of terms for that. That is, we have divided it into lower division outcomes and higher division outcomes. That is knowledge, association, comprehension and application comes within the purview of knowledge. Lower division course outcomes, there we can apply some what we have learned, we can demonstrate, then we can employ, we can illustrate, all this we can do. And this we can categorize as lower division course outcomes. Then we can go for upper division course or program outcomes, where we'll have to go for analyzing, arranging, that is analysis, then synthesize, evaluation. And now we are going, we have a bounden duty to go beyond evaluation and create something for the sake of society. So there is a duty cast upon the learner to create something of his own for the sake of the society. Then the other one is affective domain. It has received very little attention, but you know that whatever we receive, the receiving phenomenon is there. We'll have to respond to that. We'll have to assess the value of what we have learned. Then we'll have to organize it, and we will have to characterize it. So all these are coming within the purview of affective domain, and it is a perception of value issues, and it ranges from mere awareness to being able to distinguish implicit values through analysis. So value concept should be made. Whatever we have learned, we'll have to characterize that value, or we'll have to build it into a concept. So that is called value concept. So receiving phenomena, we have awareness. When we receive something, we'll get awareness. Then we can choose, describe, follow, hold, we can identify. All this can be done at the receiving phenomena. Then responding phenomena, we can have active participation from the part of the learner. Then that is, he can practice, he can report, he can tell about what he has learned, he can write about what he has learned. All this is known as responding phenomena. Then affective domain includes all this: values, motivation, attitudes, stereotypes, feelings, etc. And cognitive domain means knowledge, then application of knowledge, then analysis of knowledge. Knowledge is there, then we can, as a part of the next step, we can understand what we have learned, and out of that, we can apply what we have learned. So that is the cognitive domain. And beyond that, value, the range in recognizing the value of what you have learned to the building up of a value concept is coming within the purview of affective domain. So that is called valuing. The first two are receiving phenomena. Second one is responding phenomena. What we have learned, we can respond on what we have learned. We can write upon, we can create a write-up on what we have learned. For example, we can talk upon what we have learned. So we can explain what we have learned. That is responding phenomena. The third one is valuing. Whatever we have learned, we can work upon that. That is valuing. We can demonstrate it through a democratic process. That is valuing. Organization means organize values into priorities. We'll have to organize whatever we have learned, all these values in accordance with its priority. That is identify, integrate, then organize, then prioritize it with respect to time to meet the needs of the organization, that is family or the society. Then internalizing values, that is a value system that controls learners' behavior. We will have to imbibe it into our character building. Then as a citizen, we can use those values that we have assimilated. So all this is coming within the purview of internalizing values. So you'll have to use education for the purpose of internalizing values. And psychomotor domain, Bloom has not completed it, but later when the other people came, they have done a lot on psychomotor domain as well. So that is based on perception. Perception, what is our perception? Then what are all set in accordance with the perception? Then guided response, mechanism, complex overt response, adaptation, origination. All these can be brought under psychomotor domain. In psychomotor domain, what we do is that in psychomotor domain, we can imitate what we have learned. Then we can manipulate what we have learned. So for example, if you have learned judgment, we can write upon, or we can do a work upon what we have learned. Then we can demonstrate what we have learned with precision. So there we should attain precision, then articulation, and finally we can master over, that is articulation. We can attain, have a deliberate practice on whatever we have learned. We can repeat it any number of times and we can attain mastery over what we have learned. And finally, naturalization. That is a high level performance without thinking as much. That is, we can approach and we can invent strategies for using such activities to meet strategic needs. So that is what is called naturalization. So all this can be achieved through education, but we haven't gone to that level. As I said earlier, in India, we have crossed only one more level above knowledge assimilation. So we have just started to understand what we have learned. So then as a part of next step, we'll have to start application of whatever we have learned. After application, we'll have to go for analysis. Then we'll have to evaluate ourselves, that is self-evaluation. And then we would also be capable of creating something out of what we have learned. So we'll have to go to such higher levels of learning. Only then we can say that we have achieved all outcomes that were intended out of that learning process. If there is a gap between teaching or learning and the goals that should be attained, we'll have to bridge the gap, and for that new modalities or new modes should be should be adopted. So many other that is capable learning capabilities have been identified by the psychologists, educationalists who followed Bloom. That is reflex movement, basic fundamental movement, perceptions, physical activities. So we can bring into action all what we have learned through physical activities as well. So we can demonstrate what we have learned through activities. We can, for example, if we have learned about free legal aid, we can do that and we can demonstrate it. We can do that for the sake of the society. So that is what is called activity. So we'll have to bring it into activity. So now we can go to, this is what are the legal learning outcomes that we will have to achieve. Then we can go to evaluation. What is evaluation and what is assessment? So what are the parameters that we should adopt for the sake of evaluation and assessment? What is assessment? You know, assessment is feedback from the student to the instructor about the student's learning. You know that in spite of assessment be classified into many subgroups, we can say that every assessment, it's good every assessment shall come from the student. And evaluation shall be done by the instructor. It's always better if the assessment can come from the student to a certain extent. That we can call it as student self-regulation of what he has learned, self-regulated learning from the part of the student, then self-assessment that should be done by the student of himself and of others. That is called peer assessment. If he can assess what has been done or what has been written down or what has been talked about by his friend if he can assess the performance of another student. Assessment through performance, then that could be analyzed by a student. That means that it is better if assessment comes from the part of the student. So as the definition of assessment is nowadays a feedback that is obtained from the students to the instructor about the students' learning. So it is students' engagement in self-regulated learning, in co-regulated learning, in one's own assessment, in peer assessment, and in giving feedback. And you know that if we can divide post-structuralism, whatever is there in the society, we can name it as post-structuralism, for example, in a democratic society, where we can have the theory of formative assessment. What a formative assessment is, any type of assessment that is very indigenous and very basic to the assessment of a student. So any mode of assessment can be held to be formative assessment. And that's not for the sake of grading or marking the student, but for the sake of goodness or wellness of the student. It's for the benefit of the student. That type, in that way, any type of assessment can be considered as formative assessment. So you can say that it is an indigenous and very basic form of assessment that could be adopted for assessing a student. So that is called the theory of formative assessment. And SCT and SC. SCT and SC means socio-cognitive theory and socio-cultural theories. For example, if you want to educate the tribal group that is there, who is staying very remote to the city provinces, there we can adopt a new method. We can bring them to, the teachers can be brought to the tribal areas and the students can be taught. And the conveyance can be arranged. So socio-cognitive theory, how we can bring that to that society. So we'll have to adopt certain methods to bring that into a rural society from an urban province. That is, a movement is required, or transfer of human resources is required. Then the other one is assessment and learning, assessment as learning. So here we consider assessment as learning, because as part of learning, we are doing assessment. If student as part of learning is doing assessment, he should have, what do you say, the evaluative judgment capability. So what is required is that he should know the context there, he should know the quality of the work that should be what do you say, performed there. That is quality and standard of work that should be performed. One is the preliminary, one is the context. In what context he should do assessment? What is the context in which he is doing the assessment? Suppose if it is with regard to rights of children, so he will have to have a preliminary knowledge about the context or the content of what he is going to assess. The second one is about the standards that he should adopt, the quality. What is the quality of work that he is going to assess? That is called quality and standard. The other one is the criterion, assessment criterion. That is the criterion that should be fulfilled. There are various criteria. There will be norms, reflections, and there will be criteria, specified criteria for the criteria for getting fulfilled for assessment, for what do you say, for reaching a standard. Certain criteria has to be fulfilled for reaching a standard. So which are the criteria that should be fulfilled for attaining a particular standard? The student should know that. So that is called assessment criteria. The student knows the context. If the student knows the quality of what he is going to assess, the standard of what he is going to assess, or you can say the assessment task, we can call it as the assessment task. One is the assessment context or the subject of assessment. Second one is the assessment task. That is the quality or the, what do you say, the performance level that he is going to assess, the task or the standard of the activity that he is going to assess. So second one is quality or assessment. First one is context. Second one is quality or assessment. And the third one is the criteria that should be fulfilled for coming up to that standard. So the student has to see if those criteria are fulfilled or not. So whether those criteria got fulfilled in reaching that standard, or you can say whether the task has been accomplished or not. If the task has been accomplished, we can perceive that the quality or the standard has been reached and the work has been completed by the person, by the learner who is undertaking that task. So that has to be done by the student. So that is the matter with regard to context, with regard to quality, with regard to assessment criteria. And the final one is expertise. Expertise means the expertise which a student requires. So this the student has to gain out of repeated works or repeated assessment that he has done. You can say that deliberate activity that the student has to do in the case of assessment. If he's repeating it deliberately, he can achieve certain expertise. That is, we can call it as evaluative judgment. So expertise along with these three criteria which I have mentioned will make a student a good assessor or a good assessor as a part of his learning. So it is assessment as part of learning. That is AAL, assessment as part of learning. That is, a learner is doing the assessment as a part of his learning. For that, he requires to know about the context. For that, he requires to know about the quality of the work that he is going to assess and the criteria which he has to see if fulfilled or not for attaining the task. And finally, the expertise he has gained out of repeated assessment activities. So that is assessment, what do you say, as part of learning, assessment as part of learning, that is AAL. Then there are certain goals to be achieved by the student while doing assessment. Then the other one is, that is coming within the circle is SRL. SRL means it is related with learning, student regulated learning. That is, one who is regulating learning is the student himself. The learning is regulated by the student. So he will have to set out, he will have to know the context, he will have to know about the quality or the standard of the work, he will have to know about the criteria that should be fulfilled for attaining the standard, that is task accomplishment. And finally, he will have to gain the expertise that is required for doing good assessment. So if these are all there, then we can say that the student regulated assessment is there. So student regulated assessment is the innermost circle, and there comes certain other criteria, that is MC, metacognition, SC, self-efficacy, what the student needs to do the assessment. Is metacognition, that is higher level of knowledge, he'll have to attain more and more knowledge. Then self-efficacy, he will have to become efficient. So his efficacy adds to what he is doing as an assessor. So student, learner, or the learner regulated assessment is there when we do formative assessment. And finally, there is the feedback given by the mentor, who is the teacher. So he can base all this on the mentor's feedback, and he can see if the feedback, if his assessment and the feedback is tallying. If it is not tallying, he can continue his assessment. He can do it again. He can repeat his assessment. Then P is planning. What the student needs is planning. Then monitoring. M stands for monitoring. R stands for reflection. And what he has done, persist. That is persistence. He should be he should have such expertise that what he has done persist. And finally, E stands for the effort undertaken by the student. E stands for the effort And the willingness or the ambition, A stands for the ambition or willingness on the part of the student. So all these together form formative assessment. So it can be anything that will lead the student to do an assessment of his own. So we will let the student do the assessment. We'll see if he's doing it, in an efficient way. We can make him a good, an efficient person. Student efficacy. We can improve student efficacy. We can improve student learning through making him do assessment as part of learning. That is called student regulated learning. So we can ask the student to regulate learning through self-assessment as well as assessing those equally placed. That is, he can do the assessment of his friends in the same class. So that is called peer assessment, and he can give feedback. And finally, his feedback, motivation, everything will depend upon the feedback given by the mentor. So you can use both feedbacks in assessment. It's not only the teacher's feedback, but also the student's feedback. So you can say it comes from the Latin word. Assessment comes from the Latin verb assidere, meaning to sit with. So the assessment is, in assessment, one is supposed to sit with the learner. This implies it is something we do with and for students and not to students. So it should be with students, it should be student-centered. Actually, assessment should be student-centered. And what the teacher can do is only the final evaluation. So, but we are mistaken. Many a time we get confused with assessment and evaluation, and we'll take evaluation for assessment in most of the cases. We are mistaken as to these two concepts. We don't consider it as separately. We'll consider it as one and the same. These are not synonymous. Assessment is what is there with and for the student. And after assessment, the teacher will reach an evaluation, or he'll mark a score for the student. Then that is called evaluation. And finally, he'll sum up. Pardon? Pardon? So that is assessment. Assessment is there where one is supposed to sit with the learner. That is, learner should be there and learner should do the assessment. It is for the sake of learner. It can be done by the learner. So it is student-centered. Always assessment is student-centered. Then assessment in education means gathering, interpreting, recording, and using information about students' responses to an educational task. So you can make use of students, the pupils' responses for the sake of the task we are undertaking. So whatever task we are undertaking, suppose if it is for the sake of a course, whether that outcome is getting fulfilled or not, we can test it that through the responses from the part of the student. So what the student can do is that he can do self-assessment, he can give his feedback, he can build up his evaluative judgment through repeating his act of assessment any number of times. So that is called deliberate act of assessment. So you can do it any number of times. Then the state of assessment consists of, actually, there is confusion of term, but we can say that assessment can be shifted from teaching to learning. It's not at all a part of learning. It has now shifted to the learner's side. Then what you can say, it is pre-service and in-service training that we are giving to students. So you can say that assessment can be formative and summative. Generally, we can call it as formative and summative. These are not exclusive. We can't call these two terms as something that is quite different, but these are always interconnected in the sense that they seldom stand alone in construction or effect. That is, when we say summative assessment, we can call formative assessment as a number of summative assessment that is done during the course of teaching. So what we can say is that formative assessment is a part of teaching. So it is happening alongside teaching. So you can say it continues throughout the teaching process. So that is formative assessment. Summative assessment is where we end up with all assessments and we'll come to evaluation. So actually, these are two separate concepts, but we can't say that both these are exclusive ones because they are interdependent or interconnected in many ways. So we know that majority of genuine formative assessment is informal. When you say we conduct a debate in class and we assess the performance of students, or we conduct a group discussion in class, then or we conduct a a quiz in class. These are formative methods of assessment where we are not scoring or we are not marking the students, but towards the end we are using this for evaluating the students. This feedback will give timely feedback for formative assessment. It will be 1 day assessment. At the end of the day, we'll give the feedback. That's for making the students improve themselves. It's for the sake of the students getting improved and not for the sake of evaluating the students. Then formative assessment is assessment for learning also. As I said, now formative assessment is being done by students. So you can say this as assessment as part of learning done by the learner, but it can be also for the sake of learning for the students. So we can call it as assessment for learning also. So we can increase the quality of student learning through formative assessment. And in turn, we can increase the quality of the course itself, because through increasing quality of student, we can increase the quality of the course, the program as a whole. So we can call it as formative assessment, assessment for learning. We can call formative assessment as assessment for learning, taken at varying intervals throughout a course to provide information and feedback that will help improve the quality of student learning, the quality of the course itself. So this is at varying levels. There's no fixed intervals. You know that summative assessment is at the end of a unit. Say, for example, at the end of a semester, it is at fixed intervals. So that we can call it as a sum of all these formative assessments. Summative assessment even can be called as a sum of all the formative assessments we have done in class. But often all these are not used for marking the student or for grading the student. But we can take it as what do you say, an evaluation can be done for the sake of student. For that, we can evaluate the formative assessment. We can give the feedback at the end of the day itself, or time bound. That is, after every week, we can report the student of his status. Then the student can improve his learning. That is for increasing the quality of student learning, and also for increasing the quality of the program itself. Whatever we do, the whole entire program, for the sake of the entire program, for enhancing the quality of the entire program, we can have timely feedbacks. So timely feedback is another quality of formative, another ingredient of formative assessment. Then it is learner, as I said, it is learner-centered, it is teacher-directed, it's directed by the teacher. Mutually beneficial, that is, it's beneficial to the student as well as for the teacher. The teacher won't get biased. The teacher won't get, what do you say, won't be doing it at a single stretch. It will be done in a number of times, through a number of times. So formative assessment won't be completed in one stretch, so that it will be continuing throughout the entire teaching process. So it can be considered as teacher-centered, learner-centered, teacher-directed, but direction, the feedback will be given by the monitor or the mentor, that is the teacher. Then mutually beneficial, formative, it is very indigenous and very basic to the concept of learning. Then context specific, whatever we do, if we want to know about the students' understanding of what we have taught them today, we can give a quiz towards the end of the session. There we are doing a context specific thing, that is, we have taught a case analysis, a case study, then whether the student is assimilated or what we have meted out to them, or whether student is understood what we have rendered to, what knowledge we have rendered to them, whether the student is capable of understanding it, whether the student is capable of applying it or analyzing it. And for that, we can conduct a small test paper towards the end of the day, and the feedback can be given at the very same instance itself, at that instant itself. So we can call it as time-bound feedback, because formative assessment requires time-bound feedback, because it's for the sake of improving the quality of student learning, and it is also for the sake of improving the quality of the whole program that we are conducting. So gradually it will, it will stretch through to the whole program. It will start with one session, but it will stretch to the whole program through making the student improve. If he has the chance to improve, he can teach, he can be taught again, then he can learn again, then he can improve in the coming test papers, quizzes, in the coming debates, he can perform very well. So that is the advantage of formative assessment. That is, provides information on what an individual student learns, to practice, to have retaught, to learn next. So he can go to the next step. If he has understood what has been taught, then he can apply it, then he can analyze it, he can evaluate it himself, and then he can create a new thing out of that. So there he can go to the higher levels of learning through formative assessment. The key elements of formative assessment: the identification by teachers and learners of learning goals. Which are the learning goals? So we'll have to see what has to be assessed, then how to assess that, why to assess that. What has to be assessed depend upon the context, then how to assess that is the mode that the student or the teacher is relying upon. So is it valid? Is it reliable? Is it authentic? Whether that makes the student to have a hand-on session, whether there is a washback by the teacher after the assessment. So all these should be there in the formative, in the aspect of formative assessment. That's why I showed you earlier, I showed you a diagram. It composes of all these ingredients with the feedback given by the mentor at the center. So it is centralized by the feedback given by the mentor. It depends. The whole thing is based on the feedback given by the mentor. We'll have to tally the whole assessment with the feedback given by the mentor or the teacher. So that is what the teacher's function is in the case of formative assessment. The teacher's function is to give to do an effective evaluation and give a timely feedback. So the whole thing depends upon the mentors or the teacher's feedback. So everything is centered or circled on the basis of, or it encircles the feedback given by the mentor. It is based on the feedback given by the mentor. So the feedback is surrounded by the planning done by the student, ambition, the effort taken by the student, the persistence, the reflection, the monitoring, all this done by the student, and on that rests the student regulated learning, upon which the whole formative assessment is based on. So it is the feedback given by the teacher is very important, or outcomes and criteria for achieving these. So we'll have to see for each and every courses, we'll have to see what is the outcome of the course. For example, if you're learning intellectual property rights, we'll have to have fulfilled the outcomes that is set out by the course. So whether we know about the basic fundamentals of intellectual property rights, which we can learn out of the outcomes, whether we have achieved those outcomes. Suppose if we feel we haven't achieved, then we can identify a gap between what is taught and what has been achieved. And the gap can be bridged by relearning or being retaught or through re-practice, whatever is there before us as a remedy, we can adopt all that. So outcome based, what goal we have to reach and where we have begun. If there is a gap existing between what is taught and the outcome reached, then we can bridge it through continuous through further learning by teaching a student again, by giving him a chance to improve. So all these are possible in the case of formative assessment. Then rich conversation. The student and teacher are not in isolation, and they are always they work in cooperation. That is, there is always conversation or involvement by the student as well as the teacher. Rich conversation between teachers and students is built up, and deeper conversations are possible in the case of formative assessment. The teacher can call a group of students and talk with them about their performance, or else the teacher can talk to even a single student about his performance. So there is no comparison of students. The student is again given chance to rework, to improve, and if possible, the teacher is also willing to reteach. Student is getting retaught in the case of student-centric learning. Then the provisions of effective, timely feedback to enable students to advance their learning. So if the provision of effective, timely feedback. So the teacher has to do after application and analysis, the evaluation starts, then there is synthesis, then there is creation. All this can be done by the teacher after knowledge assimilation, understanding, and then application by the student. The rest, that is analysis, evaluation, analysis, creation, synthesis, and evaluation can be done by the teacher. So till evaluation, it is with the teacher, and after evaluation, the student can create of his own. The student can restart, the student can make a new approach, can redo what he has done. The student is given a chance to improve. So it's for the sake of students that formative assessment is structured. Then the active involvement of students in their own learning. The student should be active, should be given a chance for actively getting involved in the sphere of learning. That is, student can involve in the sphere of learning as they wish. If they wish to do it again, they can do it again. So they should be given more chance, more choices are to be given to the student for active involvement in their own learning. Teachers responding to identified learning needs and strengths by modifying their teaching approaches. So teachers can change their teaching approaches. Nowadays, there are a good many new modes being evolved in teaching. So you can use any number of modes, any number of ways. So what we have to do is that we'll have to have a good assessment done and an evaluation of the student in a proper way. So it should be valid, it should be reliable, it should be authentic, it should be helpful to the student. And for that, we'll have to give a proper feedback. Proper feedback from the part of the mentor or the tutor will always be helpful to the student to rework on what he has done already. That gives a student to relearn and to get retaught, even if time permits, and also to study again on that particular topic, to learn, to analyze, to apply, to synthesize, and to create something new out of what he has learned. So all this comes out of formative assessment. Active involvement, teachers responding to identified learning needs. If student has some disability, the teacher can help him. So what is lacking in the student? It's for the sake of assessment is done for the sake of the student. So what is lacking, the teacher can supplement. Then comes summative assessment, that is assessment of learning. Generally, it is taken by students at the end of a unit or semester to demonstrate of the sum or the result of what they have or have not learned. Summative assessment methods are the most traditional way of evaluating student work. Good summative assessment assessments, that is through tests and other graded evaluations must be reliable, valid, and free of bias. So what we have to take care is that it should be reliable. Whatever we have adopted as a means of assessment, the tool that we have adopted must be reliable, must be a reliable one, must be valid, and must be free of bias. So that's what is summative assessment. It is done at a single stretch, and it is done towards the end of the session. So we can call it as summative assessment, as a sum of whatever have been done by the student during the entire process of learning. And it's not a part of the learning process, teaching process. It is done after the teaching is over only. But formative assessment is done along with the teaching process. That makes the difference. So the student is again getting chance to improve. It's more centered on student. It's learner-centered, whereas summative assessment is teacher-centered. Factors inhibiting is that teachers always rely on the grades or the marks obtained by the students and not upon the quality of learning. So the quality of learning is, retained as such. It is not improved. That is one of the factors that is inhibiting assessment. Then greater attention is given to marking and grading, much of it tending to lower self-esteem of student, rather than providing advice for improvement. So they are not getting a chance for improvement, but they are getting lowered in self-esteem when compared to other students. Those scoring good marks will be held at high esteem, while those scoring lower marks will be held at a low esteem. And the other one is a strong emphasis on comparing students, which demoralizes the less successful learners. So that is also happening in the case of assessment. Then forms of summative assessment are performance assessment. We'll see how the student is performing. We'll see how the student is doing is undertaking his portfolio. The portfolio designs. The student can undertake the portfolio that is entrusted with the student. It may be a project. It may be a work, and a student is asked to create a write-up upon a case, then he can do that. So it depends upon the portfolio designs that is constructed by the student. In traditional tests that we are conducting, exams that we are conducting, we can conduct any number of monthly tests, and towards the end, we can conduct a midsum examination. So all these are the traditional test patterns. Portfolio means it's a comparison, it's a compilation of academic and professional materials that exemplifies your beliefs, skills, qualifications, education, training, and experience. So these are the forms of summative assessments. Then implications for classroom practice. Sharing learning goals with students. They can share the outcome that is intended to be achieved out of a particular course, or the goals that is intended to be achieved out of a particular learning program. So that could be shared with the students. Then, as I said, students can also be involved in assessment process, provide feedback timely. If it is one-day assessment, give the feedback at the end of the day, which will help the student to recognize their next steps. What should be done next? The student can think about that and how to take up such steps, how they should enter the next step. So that would be the implication for classroom practice. Be confident that every student can improve. So the teacher should believe in the students. The students should get involved in the system, in the assessment process. And for that, the teacher should believe in the students and make them get involved. So now nowadays we are using e-tools, that is, we are using malware to detecting plagiarism, then copying and all. We are using generic office software that is used in offices. Then communication tools are also used, like word processors, spreadsheets, then email. Then learning management systems such as Blackboards and Moodle can be used. Assignment and assessment tools designed specifically to support lecturers with the marking and management of assignments. So assignment tools can be developed specifically to support lecturers with the marking and management of assignments. So such e-tools can be developed. So nowadays we are using word processors, spreadsheets, then emails. We can send an email to a student. We can ask a student to give us data, give the entire data in a spreadsheet. So we can use the word processor. So all this can be used, and generic office software can also be used. Then LMS mechanisms can be systems, learning management systems such as Blackboard and Moodle can be used. Online learning can be effectively done through Moodle platforms. Then assignment and assessment tools designed specifically can be given to support lecturers with the marking and management of assignments. So this is what is related with formative with the parameters of evaluation and assessment of student learning. And this is a rough idea about the parameters of learning and assessment of students. If you have doubts, you can ask.
Is there any questions? You may please ask or simply put it in the chat box. I think there is no other queries. Ma'am, can you wind up the session?
Okay, if
Yeah.
there is no more question, you can wind up. If there is any doubt or clarification to make, you can do.
I think this is a general topic, so I think
Yeah. Okay.
it's clear to everyone.
Okay. Okay, then thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for your effective session on parameters of effective assessment and evaluation of student learning. And what we understood from this session is that the different parameters for assessment by the student through self-assessment and so on, and how to evaluate a student by the teacher through student-centric evaluation and learning process, and about the collecting of the feedback forms from the students. And once again, thank you, ma'am, for your valuable time on the behalf of LSL Law College, and thank you for the session.
Thank you, Shiba.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. And dear participants, tomorrow is the last day of our International Faculty Development Program, and there's a small change in the session due to the personal inconvenience of the resource person. So we have a validatory session at 10 a.m. by an eminent person, and please ensure your participation, and we value your presence. And we can meet tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thank you. Thank you for the participation. Thank you. Or you can leave now.